Hello there, who are watching this video. Welcome to the video on context and key concepts of risk management. We will be talking about risk management, the concepts and the context altogether. The concept and the context altogether. The agenda is something very simple. We will be talking about risk, we will be talking about chances of loss, peril, and hazard associated with risk, basic categories of risk, types of pure risk, burden of risk on society, and how do you hedge risk per se. So, meaning of risk. Risk is all about uncertainty. Uncertainty concerning the occurrence of a loss. So, there are two kinds of risk: objective risk and subjective risk. Objective risk is defined as a relative variation of actual loss from the expected loss. It can statistically calculated using a measure of dispersion such as standard deviation. Subjective risk is defined as uncertainty based on person's mental conditions or state of mind. Two persons in the same situation may have different perception of risk. High subjective risk often result in conservative behavior. Now look at it what we are talking around here. Chances of loss. Chances of loss, the probability that an event will occur. This is what we are trying to go across with it. Objective probability versus subjective probability. Objective probability refers to the long run relative frequency of an event, assuming an infinite number of observation and no change in the underlying condition per se. It can be determined by deductive or inductive reasoning. Subjective probability is the individual personal estimates of the chance of loss, is all about it. A person perception of chances of loss may differ from an objective probability of late. The perils and the hazard. A peril is defined as the cause of hazard. In an auto accident, the collision is the peril. Remember, in an automobile accident, the collision is the peril. A hazard is condition that increases the chances of loss. Say, let's say in automobile accident, the road might be bumpy. The road might not be even altogether. It can be uneven. The drivers, they might be new to the driving. The drivers, they might be old to driving but new to this particular locality or the road, or the signage might not be functioning. So there are so many hazard as a condition that can increase the chances of loss. So we have physical hazard, physical condition that increases the chance of loss. Example, icy roads, defective wiring. Moral hazard is dishonesty or character defects in an individual that increases the chances of loss. Probably somebody is driving who doesn't know how to drive a car in the first place. Example, faking accident, inflating claim amounts. Moral hazard is carelessness or indifference to a loss because of the existence of insurances. Example, leaving keys in an unlocked car. Legal hazard refers to the characteristics of legal system or regulatory environment that increases the chances of loss. Example, the large damage awards in liability lawsuits. So, basic categories of risk: pure and speculative risk. A pure risk is one in which there are only the possibilities of loss or no loss per se, as in earthquake. A speculative risk is one in which both profit or loss are possible. That is all about gambling. So, remember pure risk and speculative risk. Fundamental in a particular risk. A fundamental risk affects the entire economy or a large part of the economy per se, where a particular risk affects only the individual. Let's say the car theft. Entrepreneurship lifts or enterprise lifts risk. Enterprise risk comprises of all major risks faced by a business firm, which include pure risk, speculative risk, strategic risk, operational risk, and financial risk. Now, types of pure risk. Personal risk involves the possibility of loss or reduction in income, extra expenses or depletion of financial assets, premature death of a family head, insufficient income during retirement. Most workers are not saving enough for a comfortable retirement. Poor health, as in catastrophic medical bills and loss of earned income. Involuntary unemployment, as the case might be. Types of pure risk. Property risk involves the possibility of loss associated with the destruction of theft or property. Physical damage to home and personal property from fire, tornado, vandalism, or other causes. Direct loss versus indirect loss. A direct loss is a financial loss that results from a physical damage, destruction, or theft of a property, such as the fire damage to a restaurant. Whereas an indirect loss results indirectly from the occurrence of the direct physical damage or theft loss, such as loss of profit. due to inability to operate the after fire. Types of pure risk. Liability risk involves the possibility of being held liable for bodily injury or property damage to someone else. There is no maximum upper limit with respect to the amount of loss. A lien can be placed on your income and financial asset. Defense cost can be enormous. Burden of risk on society. The presence of risk result three major burdens on society. I repeat, three major burdens in society. In absence of insurance, individual would have to maintain a large emergency fund. The risk of liability lawsuit may discourage innovations, depriving society of certain goods and services. Risk causes worry and fear. It is prudent to set aside the fund for emergencies. However, in absence of insurance, individual and business firm would have to increase the size of the emergency fund to pay for the expected loss per se. Loss of certain goods and services. A second burden of risk is that society is deprived of certain goods and services. For example, because of the risk of liability lawsuits, many corporations have discontinued manufacturing certain products. Some 250 companies across the world once produced childhood vaccine. Today, small number of firms manufacture vaccine due to, in part of the threat of liability suit. Worry and fear. A final burden of risk is that of worry and fear are always present. Numerous examples can illustrate the mental unrest and fear caused by risk. Some passenger in commercial jet may become extremely nervous and fearful if the jet encounters severe turbulences during the flight. A college student who needs a grade of C in a course to graduate may enter the final examination room with a feeling of apprehension and fear. Methods of handling risk avoidance. Loss control, loss prevention refers to the risk to reduce the frequency of losses. Loss reduction refers to the activities of reduce from the severity of the losses. One is frequency, how often it happens, and one is severity, how deep it happens. Retention. An individual or a firm retains all or a part of loss. Loss retention may be active or passive. Non-insurance transfer. Risk may be transferred to another party through contract, hedging, or incorporation. And last would be the insurances. Now, what are the various techniques or methods for managing risk? First and foremost is easiest one, avoidance, then loss control, then retention, then non-insurance transfers, and lastly, to have an insurances. Avoidance is one technique of managing the risk. A business firm can avoid the risk of being sued for a defective product by not producing the product at all. However, you cannot avoid all the risk. Remember, what about loss control? Loss control is another technique of managing risk. Loss control consists of certain activities that reduces frequency or severity of the losses. Loss control essentially has two major objectives. One is of prevention and the other is of reduction. Loss prevention and loss reduction. Let us talk about loss prevention. Loss prevention aims at reducing the probability of the loss so that the frequency of losses is reduced. Auto accident can be reduced if the motorist takes safe driving courses and drive defensively. Loss prevention is also important from the business firm thereby. What is loss reduction? Strict loss prevention effort can reduce the frequency of loss, yet some losses are inevitable occur. Thus, the second objective of loss control is to reduce the severity of the loss after it occurs. For example, a plant can be constructed with fire resistant material to minimize the fire damages. Retention means an individual or a business firm retains part of the financial consequences of a given task. Risk retention can be active or passive also. Active retention means that an individual consciously aware of the risk and deliberately plan all or part of it as the case might be. A motorist plan to take an insurance policy against the damages. Passive retention means certain risks can be unknowingly retained because of the ignorances, indifferences, or laziness. Passive retention is dangerous if the risk retained has the potential for destroying you financially. Self-insurances, it is a special form of plan retention by which part or all of the given loss exposure is retained by the firm. It is called self-funding. What about non-insurance transfers? Non-insurance transfers are another technique of managing the risk. Here, the risk is transferred from one party other than the insurance company. The risk can be transferred by several methods, and they are transfer risk by contract, hedging price risk, incorporation of the business firm. Last would be your insurances. Insurance is the most practical method for handling major risk. Although private insurances have several characteristics, three major characteristics should be emphasized upon: risk transfer, pooling technique, law of large numbers per se. With this, I sign off from this video. Thank you for watching the video till the end.